Okay, good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the board of the Belgian Industrial R&D Association, I cordially welcome you all, both the people that made it on site, as well the people that are attending online our event. And I know, and we realize in BIR&D, that it's still not that obvious to attend such an event in person. So that's why we decided, maybe at a late moment, to do a hybrid event. And I sincerely hope that this will run very flawlessly. Maybe first, for the people that don't know us that well, a little bit of refreshment on who is BIR&D. So we are an association of 23 industrial member companies and 3 associated members that has been founded already back in 2008 and has been growing steadily since then. BIR&D members do account for a direct workforce of about 10,000 R&D people here in Belgium and 75,000 people worldwide. So I would say a quite substantial representation of R&D activities, at least here in Belgium. Our mission is, at the one hand, short and powerful, but also quite challenging at the other hand. Stimulate and improve the attractiveness and the effectiveness of industrial R&D in Belgium. In BIR&D, we are convinced that interdisciplinary, or we call it also from time to time, multidisciplinary cooperation and open innovation across a broad field of public and private stakeholders, R&D stakeholders in our case, are key elements in answering the societal challenges that we face today, and we are going to talk about a number of them in our program today. As well as this cooperation will allow to create a strong and meaningful and powerful and well-functioning ecosystem. I have to say, although the last 1.5 years wasn't the easiest period, I think, for most of us, I'm really glad to see that the R&D activities in our BIR&D member companies really continued at a high pace. And even in some of these sectors, we saw a very much accelerated level of activities in trying to answer and continue to answer a number of the challenges that we were facing. I don't need to tell that the pharma sector, I think, is a very obvious representation of this acceleration of R&D that had to be done in a very fast pace, answering the worldwide pandemic that we were facing. Today's session will be concentrated around the theme of industrialization of sustainability and circular economy, 2 huge challenges that we see in our society. As you can see here on the slide, the agenda is composed of 2 major blocks. A keynote speech that will be given by Mr. Ivan van der Kloot from the Itinera Institute here in Belgium, and a panel discussion with Mr. Ivan van der Kloot and 5 BIR&D companies on how they live these challenges and what could be next steps to really accelerate the solution for it. The session will be moderated by Ms. Jennifer Baker, who is there at my left hand side. In between the 2 major blocks, I will also announce, I have the pleasure to say so, to announce the 4 laureates of our BIR&D PhD prize for the year 2021. So, I will now give the floor to Mr. Ivan van der Kloot, who is Chief Economist at the Itinera Institute, who will talk about sustainability, innovation, and the economy, and for sure address in a very economical way, a viewpoint, what his point of view is and how to tackle it. Can I call you to the stage? Thank you.
So it's my privilege and honor to be present here to talk to you about the topics that animate us every day and which have a very shining picture for the future. And that's also very nice to talk about the optimism of today, because we have come out of a of a bit of a difficult period. I'm from the Itinerary Institute, which is a Belgian located think tank. Our privilege is that we can look beyond the short term. We are focusing on the longer term. We are very much fact-based, and we try to inspire policymakers to make things better. I had already an experience before, but this year was for me very intense. I was implicated in an evaluation analysis of the Flemish government. So I had the privilege to be in the steering committee of an audit of all public expenditure in Flanders. And one of the major things I want to talk about is evaluation-based informed policy. So the time has come to make also our political policy fact-based, science-based, evidence-based. Now, I will talk about that in a short period, but of course, it's always work in progress. It's not that it will evolve smoothly every time, but certainly in the domain of innovation policy, there is already a certain maturity to make policy based on evidence, but also there we can still make some major steps towards the future. I will, after this thought about the policy environment, talk more specifically about application towards sustainability in the circular economy, and I will then conclude. So, for me it's evident how much important it is to also have a policy in innovation which is evidence-based. Now, if you look as an outsider to the innovation debate, and it's true in every country, not only in Flanders or in Belgium, there is a main focus on inputs. Think about the 3% of GDP norm, which is a framework used in Europe, trying to incite countries to spend more on innovation, and then it's of course the collaboration between all stakeholders, also government, but also the education system, also universities, and of course also the private sector. But the 3% norm is about the input. The big challenge is to make also, to get grips on the performance of the innovation system. And at least we should be aware about the fact that we are accustomed to talk about the debate in terms of inputs instead of outputs. And in my role as, well, somebody who tries to improve public performance in this country, it's all about accountability. But of course, we demand as citizens accountability of the use of public resources. But it's the same is true in a private company. Everybody in this day and age has to be accountable. But what does it mean, being accountable? Well, it's asking the right questions. And this has to be the same ex ante as ex post. Ex ante, you have to ask yourself the question, what do we want to achieve? What are we going to do? What will it cost? And then ex post, looking back and saying, did we achieve what we wanted? Did we do what we planned? Did it cost what we planned? Well, it looks evident. And of course, it is evident. It's common sense. But it's not the way it has been working for 200 years in the domain of the public budget. And, well, I don't want to digress too much, but when the nation states were created in the 19th century, we created the check and balances with parliamentary control of the spending of public means, because we tax people. They are forced to make payments to the government. And then the idea is we have to control, we have to make sure that how the money is used. But how did we do that? For 200 years, we made just a kind of accounting analysis. what did come in taxation and what did go out in expenditure. But this is, of course, not how it's supposed to work. You need to evolve from cost budgeting, also in the public sphere, towards a prestation budgeting. What did we want to achieve with these public resources? And, well, this kind of exercise is, well, there are many terms for describing that. One of them is evidence-informed policy. A term which is often associated with that is spending reviews. And as I just stated very briefly, I was for 7 months at the cockpit of an exercise like that for Flanders. And, well, my estimate is that at least 600 civil servants have been spending a big chunk of their time the last 7 months in providing me and my colleagues with the answers to the questions we did ask them. And what is the importance for you? Well, it's also about one of the big themes, which are very my cup of tea, is innovation policy. So this is called in Flanders de Vlaamse brede heroverwegingen. And so we didn't focus that much as we do it all the time. How much do we spend in this country? But what do we achieve with the public resources used? And I want to talk a bit on innovation policy for that. Well, for people who are not completely aware of the figures for Belgium and Flanders, this is one way to grasp it. For instance, the budget for education in this country is in Flanders is 13 billion euros, and the Department of Economics, Innovation and Sciences is 2 billion. Now, I don't want to extend too much time on that. You can make the case that part of innovation is in government. I'm just talking about government in Flanders, is also a chunk in education, so that you can also make the case that the complete picture is more about something in the figures of 4 billion euros for Flanders. So, but how do you approach a process like that? When you want to make an audit, not on the accounting, but on the achievements of innovation policy in a region. Well, of course, you'd have to talk about the numbers. You ask them, how did your budget evolve over time? But then you make the big, and for some shocking exercise by asking them, what are your concrete policy objectives? For instance, a year ago, you were given the mandate to spend 2 billion euros, but what were your key objectives? So that we can evaluate whether you used the money wisely or not. And then you go more in detail and ask everybody in the process, and that's a huge army, of course, and innovation policy, people implicated with that. There are many instruments being used. There are tax deductions, which for some in the room are very important. In R&D, well, are these tax deductions the best instrument to give rise to an innovation system that's very dynamic? Or can we be a bit more critical and ask ourselves whether some tax regimes are not as efficient as they could be? And so it's about the effectiveness. Do we achieve what we plan to do with innovation policy? But it's of course also about efficiency. Are there other ways to do it better? And all the people in the room know how difficult that is in every organization to think out of the box by saying, well, I have been accustomed to do it like that for years, but maybe we should start from scratch. Maybe we should try to make a space in our head and think for a few minutes or a bit longer, are there better ways to achieve the objectives we have? And what can you learn from international benchmarking? Well, this is already a very important set of instruments you can use to evaluate the innovation policy of a region. There is this focus on there are new resources. Instead of just using money and personnel, we have also the instruments of digitalization. Do we use that instrument already sufficiently in our innovation system in this country, in the private, but also in the public sector? Are there so ways of simplification? And that's of course not limited to using digital means. You can have simplification in just business re-engineering, do it completely different than you used to do. And of course, there is a big question, certainly in the domain of innovation, how difficult it is to measure the impact of our policy instruments. Well, sometimes it's very difficult to make the connection between how much do we spend on innovation and the economic growth of a country. It's not that linear. And that's about the systemic effects of innovation. Very confrontational for many civil servants is the question, but are you sure that you should be doing the things you are doing? Maybe what you are doing doesn't belong in the public sector. Maybe some private companies could take this task in a way which is much more efficient, but maybe just also much more logical. So why is this task being performed in the public sector and not the private sector? Well, the coincidence is that I was now implicated for 7 months in making this analysis for the Flemish government, but I had just written a book on that. And well, in the 2 languages existing in our country, the main languages, I have to say. So these are the covers of the book. But so it doesn't only ask the question, are there funds being used efficiently and effectively, which is a question everybody has to ask themselves in every organization. But when we are talking about the use of public resources, it's also the question, shall this policy be funded with public money? Or is it not logical that we use taxation resources for this objective? Now, that's for me very important to make the case that we have to progress even further in the direction of evidence-based policy. And we are never there. We can make the case that we have already some evidence-based policies, but it's, as I stated already, sometimes very difficult to make this analysis in a very correct way. Now, of course, we have this big debate on sustainability all over the world, and also, of course, with its implications for us. And, well, I just want to present a bit of my ideas on, for instance, the circular economy, using a lot of work I've done personally, but also some publications you can find on our website, itinerariinstitute.org. So we had a focus report on the circular industry, which is already not the whole debate, because the circular economy is much more encompassing than just the industry. And of course, well, the circular industry, that's a very specific case where, for instance, well, the location of activities is already a huge factor. The fact that you can have ArcelorMittal in Ghent, and you have the neighborhood of the port, and you have the neighborhood of other enterprises which can use, with whom you can make a circle, means that you have what economists are calling for agglomeration effects. You can do other things in some places than in other places. And location is crucial for making a success of the circular economy. And so this is a paper which is from a geographical economic view focusing on that. It's about making use of the raw materials, but also immaterial resources, having testing grounds. We don't want to pretend to the outside world that all technology is already existing, because that's a dangerous route to take. Because sometimes politicians, well, then they spend huge amounts of money on technologies which are not already tested. But of course, you have to start somewhere. So we need to have some room for experiment. And in many domains, in the topics of circular economy, we need more testing grounds. And collaboration between the different stakeholders, government, private sector, universities, and others, is of the main importance. But infrastructure is a very big responsibility of government. Well, this is just a picture from this report to make the case that the circular economy is much more broad than just the circular industry. And, well, for an industry, it's very important to make a success also for our region and our country of the circular industry, but for transforming society, it needs to be a much broader picture than just that. And that means, and that's the big thing in this room, it's not just about technology. It's also about governance. And so when people ask me to participate in debates and all that, it's not that because I have this much more knowledge about the technologies. There are many people in the room who are much more specialized in certain technologies than me, but because you also need to talk about the systemic effects and the governance of making this a success. And think about the four big actors in society making the best of the combination of the public sector, the private sector, the civil society, and the individual responsibility of people. But in order to make a success of the circular economy, well, one of the big things is, of course, we need to find sound business models. Many of you in this room can present many concrete technological cases for implementing for the circular economy or industry. But to make it fit and to make it profitable, that's something else. And so many things are already present in the testing grounds or in the concepts, but not in the business case. And then you need to think about what are obstacles for making a success of the circular economy and finding new business models. Now, I just want to make some brief observations, and not because they're all encompassing, but I believe that some of you will be confronted with some of them. Of course, one of the big obstacles for closing the cycle, if I could make it that brief, the statement, is the complexity. Even a simple toothbrush can consist of 40 components from all over the world. So how do you make this transition to close the cycle? How do we imagine that if something is produced in China and for closing the cycle, do you need to have partnerships with all producers of the components of the product? Will you invent, will you move towards local reuse? Will you have a global reverse network? These are very much economic questions. You will sometimes just make the circular economy a very local thing. But for some products, which are often very precious, you will need to do that on a global scale. And how much more difficult is that? The complexity of materials is, of course, very stupefying. And, well, the spectrum of additives and materials in one single product can be very hard to grasp. And the truth is, of course, that in some of our products, there are components we don't even know of. And then a very big theme, and I will write in the coming months new reports on that, is the lock-in problems in our system. Well, you can have business models which every day, or not every day, but quite regularly, I meet an inventor, an entrepreneur, who has a completely revolutionary idea, and he will say, this business will completely be wiped out because my product is much more superior. But then it doesn't happen. And why doesn't it happen? Because, well, he's only focusing on very small part of the complete chain. And, well, there is this dominance of the system, and you can make a completely superior improvement in one part of the chain. But if that implies that the whole chain has to be reinvented, and there are no quick solutions for that, then this brilliant inventor will be frustrated the whole of his life that his genius is not being recognized. So lock-in effects are a huge factor in moving towards a circular economy. And of course, we are human beings. We are just not robots. And, well, this implies, for instance, that we also have to think about changing behavior of people. And we think this is a new thing. Of course, it's not a new thing. How many years have we been debating congestion in traffic and miraculous solutions to solve the problem? But as long as people don't see themselves as part of the problem, that their own contribution to the traffic problem is not existing, why are all these other people at this time on the road? Yeah, but you are on the road too, and you are part of the congestion. These are, well, maybe some of the most bewildering parts of the transition to a circular economy. Of course, there are more evident issues like demography, the transforming of society with aging and still population growth in many parts of the world. But it's not just about the numbers of people, of course. It's about changing lifestyles, and that's evident. Everybody understands this. If every Chinese would behave and consume as we do, then we have a problem. But what if we are moving towards that, and how do we cope with that? And then, well, it's about conflicts. Our human societies are ways to manage conflicts between people, but individuals, but also between nations, societies. And, well, I hope that, well, we can overcome these conflicts, because this is a vital step towards making sustainability and circular economy to have a chance of succeeding. Current business models are, of course, part of the problem. The fact that, and this is reality, this is life. We all try to influence others, also policymakers, to protect our own business model. But how do we make sure that this is not an obstacle for achieving the policy objectives and the change we need all to have a livable planet? The lifespan of products is one of the key topics in the debate on the circular economy. And one of the first classes a professor of economics always has to teach is that there is a huge difference between the economical and technical lifespan of a product. Some of my parents are still using products which are 50 years old, well, many companies don't do that, because they say it's not about the technical lifespan of the product, but it's about the economical lifespan of the product. One deep problem for society are rebound effects. You can be a genius. You can make, and also not only in the technological field, but also in the social innovation. You can have a solution to make cars using less fossil energy. But if the result is that just more cars are being produced, then this rebound effect, as it is called, illustrated by one of the first major economists in history, is completely overcompensating the innovations you make. And of course, that's a bit challenging because many people then say, it only can be avoided by putting the right price. And then we are talking about taxation in many cases. But we will lose many people if the only solution we have to problems like that is always to tax people more. We will not get very far. And that's a challenge because in this period of time, some people just think that everything has to be solved by taxation. It's also, of course, about information problems. Do we know where the products are? I give the example of electronic devices. Well, and then how do we make sure that this is solve this problem? Well, there are technologies to make sure that we know from the point of production for the whole lifespan of the product where the device has been and we don't lose track of it. More broadly, we have to talk about coordination problems in moving towards a circular economy. Information is spread and action demands cooperation, but often many of my colleagues then come with the solution, government has to intervene. And I'm not against government, but I'm just saying that also, for instance, producers and businesses can make cooperation agreements among them. You don't always need to look to government for solving this coordination problem. Benefits and costs are unevenly distributed along the value chain, and then you have to make, well, for your business case, to find solutions to that. In many business models will be based on, more extensive guarantee systems. In any case, incentive systems. You can move from an ownership model to an access model. You don't own these lights anymore, you rent them from Philips, for instance. And so the cycle is being closed because you have moved from ownership to access. You can have take-back models, you can have renting, leasing models. Think about your product, your company, and making this out-of-the-box exercise, whether you have to change the way you tackle the ownership or access problem. It's about sharing models. Online streaming is an example, of course. Take-back models are very present already in the chemical industry. Rental models are typically for high-cost products. And I already gave this example of the lights in the room. How to make the business model is often about monetizing idle capacity. Not capacity is present, but often very scarcely used. It's with the frequency, like the roads, they have a congestion time, and the other hours of the day, they are often empty. How do you monetize the idle capacity? It's having better control on the product life cycle. Well, let me try to end my talk already a bit with some do's and don'ts for policy. Make sure to be aware that we don't already have all solutions. So we need room for experiment. And, well, government can help, but government can also sometimes by regulation and other instruments be a problem in having this room for experiment. Beware of the risk adverse interpretation of rules. Well, regulation always has an origin. There is a purpose why a certain regulation has been invented once in the past. But today, it can become a huge obstacle for the real purpose of moving towards the circular economy. The public sector can trigger business cases as a customer. It's about procurement tenders, and we have to learn from best practices. And then, of course, it's about having it fit all together. How much do we rely on behavioral adjustment? We can just tell people, you should behave differently. Anders gaan leven. It was the name of a political party in Flanders a long time ago. But, well, how optimistic can we be? And what is needed to make people behave differently? Will we rely on nudging, regulation, or other instruments? It's not only about technology. I very much appreciate that this room is filled with technology people, but it's about a societal change, a societal transformation. And this will be only possible if we don't just fix our attention on technological issues, but also on how do we embed them in society. Think about having policies sometimes which are top-down, because you need sometimes to have top-down policies, but also very much grassroots spontaneity, creation of new ways of doing business. Think about creating a sufficient acceptance among the population for this change towards the circular economy. It's about not only talk about the problems of climate change, but also about the opportunities for a better life quality. And yeah, there is this big question about, do you tackle it on a local space, or do you have to move towards the global space to make things happen? Well, and I believe that this will be in the panel debate for some people. We will talk about digitization, the use of data, Internet of Things, AI, network effects of decarbonization technology, how do we use hydrogen, electricity transformation, the life cycle of products, new materials, standards, closing the loops. These are one of the topics we can talk about today, but it's all encompassing. It will be all about the whole of society, and not just parts of it. And I want to end with this optimistic view. Sometimes we are a bit disappointed that things don't change more swiftly, but think about this statement to be a bit more relaxed on that. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and everyone I think was rapt and very much attentive to what you were saying. My name's Jennifer Baker, as Marnix's introduced. I'm a technology policy journalist, so I'm sorry to bring the tech side again, Ivan, but there we are. We're going to have a short Q&A now. I would like people in the room, there is a microphone if you've got questions for Ivan, and also for those of you watching at home, please do use the platform to send your questions in. And in fact, we already have one that's come in online from Simon, who is asking, with the post-COVID macroeconomic changes, the increasing power and footprint of China in our EU intelligence and resources ecosystem, how can the Belgian authorities best react to support our circular and regional-based industries?
Well, you need to be, you need to tackle the problems at the right space. So you don't want to be in the case that all problems will only be solved if you have agreements with China. Sometimes you will need them, but that will be sometimes very challenging. So you also need to have, and certainly in many technological domains, you need still experiment and try things out. And well, in the 19th century, a lot of room for experiment was still present on the nation state level. But often at this level, everything is blocked. There is not that much flexibility anymore. But then you can make innovations at the level of municipalities. Well, this is what I'm talking about, testing grounds, You need to find the right space. But of course, sometimes you will need to have a negotiation, a discussion with China, and you will need to talk about the hard stuff. If China is still opening plants producing steel based on coal, and we are trying to do our best to close coal enterprises, then that's a conflict. And I talked about it's unavoidable that sometimes we will have conflicts, but we will need to have already a very common purpose in Europe with other partners in the world, and then also with countries like China.
Have we any questions in the room? Does anyone want to raise their hands? Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a very enlightening presentation. One topic that bounces as in all the different sectors of the industry here is the digitalization, artificial intelligence, data science. So what's your perspective on what can we do better here in Belgium or Europe? Is this something that we should do more from an industry, pre-competitive? Should the government take a stronger role with regard to governance, to data privacy? I believe there is a lot more potential there, but I'm interested to get your perspective.
Well, at this point, I'm already thinking about two big themes. I talked about the procurement instrument that government, if it would digitalize itself, you already have a huge market, because governments are big customers, and society can benefit from that if our tax authorities, if our many other ministries would be using more of digital instruments. So but they should build a strategy on that. They should have this knowledge about what has chance of which kind of technologies are being developed in our country, but also somewhere else. But certainly true, we want to have a manufacturing base in our own country. And I was very brief on that, but we have worked at Itinera on making the case that we need more industry in this country, and we have even a target for that of 20% of GDP, which is a big step from where we are now. But government should build a strategy on that. Well, we can make a difference if a certain government in Belgium would say, we adopt this technology, not just because we can use it as a customer, also because we want to push the innovation in this sector. The second thing is your question about the potential problems and that regulation and defensive or archaic regulations or incentives are just an obstacle for that. And then, the government has to identify in the ways in how its regulation is an obstacle for the change we need. When you talk about data science and artificial intelligence and privacy, there are big ethical debates, but we have to take a stance on what is needed for society, and not just focusing on the risks. There will always be risks, but it's about managing risks and daring to innovate. And that's, of course, in a country which, I'm not just talking about Belgium, but many countries in the Western world which have evolved towards a mixed economy model where government is very much dominant, and I'm not against government, but there is this issue that big institutions like government are more risk-averse than they should be. And we need to have an open debate on that. And so it needs some kind of, one of the issues is we need to have places where we meet and where we can discuss these things. And, we can improve that very much in many countries.
I see you here at the front.
It's on. Okay, wonderful. So on the economics perspective, we tend to have usually 3 types of capital in government, organizations, industry. The financial capital, the technical, industrial capital, and last but not least, the human capital, ourselves, intellectual capital. Natural resources are usually seen as input in our production models as part of our working capital, the VLC. What will be the impact of, is there any impact or is there any possibility to move ahead in also starting to evaluate the natural input as capital rather than operational input in our models? Will that impact sustainability or circular economy?
Well, I'm not denying that we also have to make mental shifts, that the way how we treat things, for instance, in the discipline of economics, can be problematic. So in the standard economic model, we call all these environmental issues externalities, and it can be a hand-waving. Well, we have this kind of consumption and production, and we are not blind. We know that pollution exists, and we need to solve it, but just looking them as externalities, as something out of our economic system, is not always helpful. Certainly, also this creates the tendency, and that's, well, because I'm not thinking that there are that many full-trained economists in the room, but was this, at the basis of all these theories, there was this professor who said externalities have always to be treated, not always, but that was the main thrust, by government intervention. And so it's a bit of a paradox, because people who criticize this traditional economic way of thinking, they want to have more government intervention. But maybe part of the problem is that because we defined the pollution problems, the environmental problems in that way as something which creates the economic system to the cost of the environment, that then there is this tendency to only look for government for solutions. And I'm not against government, but if we believe that every problem in society always needs a government solution, then it will not work. Governments cannot handle all problems. Governments are also very complex institutions with their problems of their own, like any company, as a private company too. But we need all forces in society. And so we need, that's one of the reasons why what you are pinpointing to, it's not just a technological point that you are making, it's also indeed the domain of social innovation. We need also social innovation to have a better chance to tackle the problems we want to.
I don't see any hands, so if I may...
There's still one
we
more.
do?
Yeah.
Great.
Philippe Jacques Solvay. I really like your example with the toothbrush. Already 40 components in such a simple device, so what about, I don't know, electric car battery or something like that? And so what I would like your reflections on how to reduce the complexity of the circularity by working really on thinking about developing new compounds, new device that would be much easier to recycle. So talking about sustainability by design, how to bring this approach more efficiently in really our innovation world.
Well, and that shows that you have to take it a very broad angle, because it's not just a producer of a product. You also need to talk about the design of our cities. You need to talk about the whole of the environment. So everything is interconnected, and the key theme is by design. You don't want to have a product and then solve the problems created by the product. You want to have a full grasp of the potential problems in advance, and then say we make other design choices because then we will have already a much better chance to reach our objective. Now, one of the big things, of course, and I think for technological people, it's huge, the importance of that, it's modularity. It's making sure that you don't have just 40 components in a toothbrush, but you have a modular approach, that there are parts of it which you can replace as a whole, and so you have chunks of products, and so you reduce the complexity of the products by modularity. And I think making this statement in general is the best, because you all have your own products and your own challenges, but think about it. How can you reduce complexity of your products? Often specialization is an economical process, and it doesn't lead to less complexity, it leads to more complexity. But one of the big levers of change for the circular economy is reducing complexity.
Do we have any more questions here in the room? Well, before I let you go, I wanted to take you up on this question you mentioned of taxation as a way to drive change in cultures and societies, and a general resistance to it, because most people will say they don't like more taxation. But whether, if you have specifically earmarked outputs for that taxation, so for example, your car tax is only spent on roads, your environmental footprint tax is spent on reforestation, do you think that's got a chance of improving?
Yeah, I just want to, I'm not here to defend my profession. The traditional way of looking at economic things by economists is we don't want that. It's not efficient. We don't want earmarked taxes. But that's because economists are not humans. Economists don't tend to think about the human side of things. And of course, it's vital for transformation of society that we do that. And of course, I'm making a general statement. There are many disciplines in economics which are now much more in depth on the behavioral side of things, the psychological side of things. And so you can make more, you will have a better chance of convincing the people of transition if you can sometimes use earmarked taxes. That the receipts of the tax on car use are not just spent on something else, but really focused on making this transition possible. And so, yeah, taxation has its problematic features. We don't want to rely too much on it, because it creates frustration, it creates opposition. So sometimes you need to use it. It's no way around it. But we should use it more scarcely than we do until now. There is a tendency in economics to ecological problems. We use taxation as the device which needs to solve everything. But it will become a problem instead of a solution if we overuse the taxation instrument.
Well, thank you very much. And I know you're staying with us for the panel, so I will get to put more questions to you very soon.
Thank you.
And also for those of you watching online, remember you can send in your questions as well using the platform function. But now I'd like to invite back on stage Marnix, because we are going to have the BIR&D PhD Awards 2021. So please, sir, take it away.
So, although we are quite technical in the room, I think we would like to show our human face as well by rewarding people. So, it's my pleasure to announce the BIR&D PhD winners for the year 2021, knowing that the process for the selection and the applications did start already in 2020. BIR&D has been rewarding multidisciplinary research since its start. First, we started with sponsoring master thesis activities, one that even led to a spin-off. That's great news, I would say. And then in the 7 past years, by making sure that we awarded strong PhD theses. We have 4 prizes of €5,000 each that we award, 2 related to the science and technology part, and 2 related to the life sciences. Maybe a bit on the criteria. It's not just an easy selection that we usually do, but we have 4 strong criteria. Obviously, the PhD has to have an academic excellence, but we trust there our dear partners from the university and the academia that they ensure that the people are getting their PhD because of the fact they have shown academic excellence. The PhD has also to be performed at the Belgian university. That's also one of the criteria. And the 2 others are sometimes a little bit less obvious for the PhD thesis. The one on multidisciplinarity of the research, that's sometimes not that easy to evaluate for the jury, and also to look at the potential for industrial valorization in a time frame 3 to 5 years from the submission of the PhD. For the call that we launched in 2020, as usual, we got quite a number of applications that we received, strong applications that we received. And I would like to thank the Fonds voor Wetenschappelijk Onderzoek and the Fonds de la Recherche Scientifique, FNRS, for organizing the whole process from the call to the submission to the award winner nomination, for which we have always used the distinguished jury members from different universities in Belgium. And they have a lot of work to judge those files because they have to work through it, and the process takes usually a bit of time here. And I'm now more or less at the point to show you the laureates that we have this year. So for the category Science and Technology, it's Dr. Rea Verbeke from KU Leuven, with a thesis called Chlorine Resistance, and now I have to use my paper here, Polymeric Membranes for Sustainable Water Purification. So this is very much at the heart also of sustainability, and we see a lot of things coming up in that sector there at many universities and even in certain ecosystems that are created recently. Second winner in the category Science and Technology is Dr. Mats de Jong from University of Antwerp, with a thesis on a highly accurate portable electrochemical sensor for cocaine, from methodology to testing in the field. From methodology to testing in the field, sorry, I was maybe a bit too quick. And then we move to the category Life and Health Sciences, where, and this is not on purpose, but this just came out by the evaluation of the different theses. We have for each, we have them addressing a quite relevant and domain of, I would say, problematics that we see in health. One related to cancer and one related to diabetes. So first winner was, or is, Dr. Pavel Bienias from KU Leuven, with a very, very, very difficult title to read. Podoplenin expressing macrophages promote lymphangenesis and lymphoinvasion in breast cancer. And then we have, as a second winner, Dr., and I apologize a little bit for the pronunciation here, maybe, Jining Xu from UCL, with a thesis called Peptide-Loaded Nanoparticle Oral Delivery Strategies Towards Diabetes Treatment. Unfortunately, 3 of the winners could not be present today. Some of them are abroad at this moment in time and could not make it here. Another person had professional things at hand this afternoon, but at least we have one winner, and I would like to call Dr. Jining Xi to the stage here so that at least can hand over the certificate to one of the winners. Please give a big hand to Dr. Jining Xi. Congratulations. Thank you, thank you. And I really appreciate, because you have to know that Dr. Jining Xu is working at this moment in time in Cambridge, UK. And this is not an obvious travel, as most of you realize today. So really thanks and appreciate that you're here. Also, I would like to congratulate the promoter of the thesis, Professor Anna Belocchi. Thank you very much. Just maybe a small point for the people that would like to get in touch with our PhD winners. We can provide you the contact details. They have been so kind because we announced the prizes to them already back in April this year to present their work to the board members of BIR&D some time ago. And they also created a small video, I think of about 1 minute, to introduce them to their work. So we will publish those videos on our website in the coming days together with this live streaming of the event. So there you can also get more information about their excellent work. So this closes this part of the program. I'd like now to move to invite the people that are part of the panel to the stage. So obviously Mr. Ivan van der Kloot, Dr. Werner Verbiest, Dr. Marc Fugain, Mr. Massimo Venegoni, Dr. Geert Maasmans, and Mr. Jean Jouet to the stage. We welcome and have a seat.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Monix, and again, congratulations to those winners. Right, the title of our conversation today is going to be circling around the circular economy. So I do want once again to encourage people watching online to put their questions to our excellent panelists on the platform, and as well as to invite everyone in the room. Don't be shy about raising your hands. I have some questions prepared, but I'm sure many people here, more minds make better questions. So with that, I think we'll start. Jean, next to me here, is worked for 32 years in the steel industry in various areas and has a wealth of experience living in different countries. So give me your introductions, your thoughts on the general topic.
Yes, definitely. It was very interesting to listen to your presentation, and I like the focus on fact-based and evidence-based, and particularly when it's about our common behavior. I took a long time to read a study which was done in Belgium by Vito and Climact regarding the target for 2050 in Belgium. And there are various scenarios, and one is focusing on more behavioral changes. And I like the approach, even if it's difficult. So I like this balance between technology, which is key for sure, but also behavior, which will have less impact when it's measured with usual KPIs, but it's more important for the global acceptability of the change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, and we'll keep going down the line. So we have Geert Maasmans from Cargill. You're the R&D leader for the global starches, sweeteners, texturizers, and you're also representing the regional EMEA R&D. So tell me again your response to Ivan's presentation and your thoughts on the overall topic, just to set out your stall.
Well, thank you. So we work largely in the food and beverage industry. And so for us, on the one hand, we try to make a distinction between the topic on circularity and the topic on sustainability. And in a way, from one way of looking at it, is that if you talk about circularity, it's something that we as an industry maybe have lost a bit. Ages ago, villages, tribes were circular in using everything that came from agronomy, was being used in all kinds of different things. And today we live in a world where 20% of foods get wasted. And so there is an element for us about, okay, it's about control, delete, and resetting, but in a modern context. So fully agree with Jean, there is this social dimension, there is this consumer science that we probably need to look into much more, with the additional question of how do you make that then also economically viable? Because economists like yourself have been teaching us about circularity to uncircular things, because of pressures of economical viability and profitability. Yeah. And sustainability for us is something different, which takes a lot more of those human dimensions of being fairly paid, having human rights, being able to live and grow and work in a decent environment. at a different stage. And so we try to link them as much as possible because we do see them as interconnected, but we want to point out anyway that circularity is not always sustainable and sustainability is not always circular.
We will interrogate that a little bit more, I think, in the conversation. So Massimo Venigoni, AB InBev, you're the Global R&D Sustainability Manager, and that's quite a responsible title, I imagine. And you're in the Global Innovation and Technology Centre in Leuven. Tell me a bit more about what you're doing.
So in AB InBev, that's the largest brewer in the world, we do have very ambitious sustainability goals. Sustainability is not just circularity. Sustainability is also decarbonization, water efficiency, and the empowerment of communities that are providing us with the raw material needed to brew our amazing beers. Now, as mentioned before, circularity is sustainability, but sustainability is not only circularity as well. What we are trying to do in the Global Innovation Center in Leuven is to empower our innovation teams all around the world, commercial and both technical innovation, with the right tools to drive evidence-driven decision-making and, of course, innovation processes to launch product in the market. Of course, different materials. We are going to have, for sure, the brewing materials, the metals, the polymers, the glass, etc., in order to accelerate, right? To use innovation to accelerate our business toward these 2025 sustainability goals. Of course, sustainability is much more broader than this. So the full ESG aspect is taken into consideration. And this is also, as many other colleagues and audience members today, we also disclose on a yearly basis ESG reports where we incorporate the progress towards this. And it's my responsibility to make sure that not only we have the managerial, technical, and scientific capabilities in place to pursue our 2025 goals, but also that we are able, as rightly mentioned at the start, we are able to solve the problem at the top of our supply chain, at the top of our innovation streams. And that's why I really like the intervention on innovation design principle, packaging guideline principles that was made by the audience a few minutes ago.
Thank you. So, Mark, Vice President of Technology and Innovation for AGC Glass, you hold a chemical engineering master's degree, so you can really get into the molecular level of what we need to do. And I know you worked for several years in Asia, so perhaps you can also compare and contrast different parts of the world for us.
Yes. So good afternoon, and thank you for the talk. So what we want to do at AGC as a glass company is that we want to tackle this problematic on the whole value chain. Of course, we are in industrial manufacturing processes. When we speak about hydrogen, you speak about electricity. That's of course important to produce a glass product with the less CO2 possible. But we see also that once we have 1 unit of direct emission, we have also 1 unit of indirect emission. So that's a global problem. The second level where we want to work, of course, that's the products that we supply. We have products that improve insulation of the buildings, that provide comfort. So that's important as well. And the last topic on which we work, and it's mostly the case in Europe and much less in the other part of the world, that's the circularity. A window at the end of the life, that's very basic. Most of the time it's not reused, it's not recycled, it's just thrown away. So we want to address this. What do we do with that product? Can we reuse it? Can we modify it so that it becomes another product? So all those are topics on which we work. You speak about the modularity in the construction. That's very important. So we have a nice research center in Belgium where we have about 300 people working on those topics.
Thank you. And last but not least, Werner Verbist, Strategic Partnership and Alliances Leader at Janssen Pharmaceutical, Johnson & Johnson. So it's been a busy year and a half for you, I imagine.
Yeah, no, thanks for the invitation. I think to quote the head of the VIB, which I met the last 2 days, the last year, I think for all of us has been a year to forget, but also a year to remember. And I think I'm speaking on behalf of Janssen, but also the whole industry. It has been quite a hectic year, but I think a few things that with Ivan's presentation have resonated. I think it's innovation. Janssen exists now almost 70 years, and is also sustainability, and we're part of Johnson & Johnson. We're almost under 35 years, so everything that we do is in the long term. And I think that is something that governments, but also industry, should think more about, doing things in the long run, long term. Of course, you have to deliver on the short term, but you don't have a long term if you don't have a short term. It's intertwined. So I think innovation and sustainability is ingrained in our DNA. Innovation on ecological sustainability. We're very proud, as you know, and we shared it with the board of the BIR&D, that we will launch later this year our geothermal energy plan. So by the end of the year, it will be operational. That will mean that we pump water 2.5 kilometers in the ground. It's heated up in a closed loop circle, brought up back again, and that will be heating and cooling our facilities. And also since the beginning of the year, all our facilities, both in the Netherlands and in Belgium, are on green energy. So these are real token of our commitment to the long term. But the idea is also to share the experience, like the geothermal energy. We work with Vito, we work with other companies, we work with the government, and the whole idea is to really use that information, the learnings, and to share it with the industry, so that the whole community and that the whole that the whole region can benefit from those experiences.
Well, thank you. I do want to talk about innovation, and I'm going to start in the middle, Massimo, with you, because I'm going to jump around to keep everyone awake. How do we create the right ecosystem for really revolutionary, innovative ideas? And I mean the sorts of leaps that we see. For example, we always say, Edison didn't invent the light bulb by trying to make a more efficient candle. So it's where do we allow the space to have the sorts of R&D that make big breakthrough changes?
I think if we really had the full answer to these wonderful questions, we wouldn't be sitting here today. But just to keep it short and try to combine my technical and economical experience, I will say one of the major drivers that I've seen empirically in my current position in BIR&D is the need for collaboration. The need for collaboration not merely within internal departments, so linking R&D with the marketing demand, but also getting outside. And I can't stress this enough, getting outside the current boundaries of the organization and start collaborating with your full supply chain, start collaborating with what the same day you might even consider, or you were considering competitors or other FMCG, because in the end, this is more of an ecosystem advancement rather than a standard company versus company advancement. In the end, if an innovation is brought up by a BIR&D or any other FMCG, in the term of sustainability, meaning circular economy, meaning a more efficient way to brew beer, a more efficient way to pack beer and send it throughout the world by one of these companies, there are for sure external spillovers or externalities that can be representing an advantage for other companies in the ecosystem. So it doesn't mean that the R&D of, for example, BIR&D logistics or innovation of other companies in terms of product needs only to be well exploited by that same reality. And I know it might sound fluffy, but collaboration and creating the right background to fulfill this collaboration across industries and companies, it's 100% instrumental.
Geert, do you agree? And how would you make the business case for that if you do?
So the easy answer is to say that I disagree.
Okay.
But I do agree. I think it's an essential element of getting things done faster. Because one thing we didn't talk about in the discussion so far is how these things need to be accelerated nowadays. how things are moving and that we need to get them quicker maybe than ever before. So, and to answer part of that question for speed, that need for speed and that sense of urgency, collaboration certainly is something that can enormously help. The business case is, in a number of cases that we have tried, that kind of quote-unquote impossible, because of something that Ivan was talking about earlier on how across entire value chains, how do you make sure it's distributed fair? And so if I have to quote-unquote give up versus my current position, I'm treating that as less fair than maybe Massimo, who's seeing something of an increased benefit from that. Whereas if we put things together, we're probably better off as a society. And so part of the start there, part of building business models and business cases there, is really simply getting over it and accepting that if we don't do it as quote-unquote established companies here around the table ourselves, that other people will be doing it. And so there is a business case to be made around what if we don't, right? So that's that part. But there is another part I wanted to stress on, which the part is where I say I disagree, is that I think it's also easier for people who are starting from a white page. And that's maybe then talking to the lock-in effect that Ivan talked about. You see a lot of initiatives nowadays going on between very smart people all across the world who are redesigning business system, business models, other things that are not fitting the way that we have organized our value chains. And so part of it, if you ask for how do we make those leaps and how do we create that, is really to make sure that we stimulate those kind of things. And then hopefully that we as quote-unquote big companies don't destroy those.
Well, Ivan, we're touching on some of the stuff you mentioned in your presentation, and I was struck at the very beginning you said, what are the objectives? And we've just heard here a mention that we might be better off as a society, whereas if you're running a business, your objective is to make a profit. So, you know, let me be a bit provocative. Do we need to change what our objectives are?
Well, it's unavoidable that you have purposes for the whole of society and you have purposes for your own company. And sometimes they will overlap easily, and sometimes it won't be the case. And it's certainly a valid point that you don't want to be dogmatic. And that's a bit, I think, business people realize partially that these topics are being treated often very dogmatically, whether or not ideologically, but that doesn't help human society if you're being too dogmatic. So if government gives us the incentives, you need always to collaborate, well, then it's not how society functions. We didn't move to the place we are on the basis of that. We used the two big levers in economics, which are competition and cooperation. And that's a tension which is not always sympathetic, but people find cooperation more sympathetic than competition. But it's my duty as economist to tell you that healthy competition is vital for society, also in the domain of making the sustainable transition.
Werner, let me get your thoughts on this. So are we dogmatic?
I think, yeah, Ivan has a point. I think government can play a role there, but I think any dogma, I think it's bad. I think from innovation, the world is our lab. And in fact, as Belgium, I think we should think I just came from a conference and it was shown there that Belgium is doing very well in the life science sector, both from innovation, a number of patents, publications per capita, the number of innovation that is brought to patients in Belgium, reimbursement, solutions coming, whether it's devices, diagnostics, pharmaceutical. But where we're not that good in is in fact in translating some of the good ideas which we have fantastic universities, fantastic biotech and startup, is to translate that into new companies. So we have a way to go in fostering the entrepreneurial spirit in the region, but for all the other factors we're scoring pretty good, in fact. And collaboration is key, but it has to come on an organic way. It cannot be forced.
Jean, let me ask you then, if we've got these objectives and collaboration may or may not be one of them, sustainability, since we're talking about the circular economy, may or may not be one of them. What sort of metrics do we need to have on these to measure them? How can you say we've been successful at that unless you set out from the start what you want to achieve?
At the first point, we need to use these KPIs that were mentioned previously, energy consumption, material consumption, global yield, which is an important point. Of course, for example, we at John Cockerill, we are in the B2B business, so the way we had our customers is usually not the end user, even if sometimes we can consider the end user needs. But of course, the client satisfaction, or at the end, the end user need, is also a key point. Sometimes, and maybe I would add something to your first question and the answer of my colleagues, I would add one word: boldness. Because sometimes we have also to fight, let's say, the general ideas in the consumers, in the client, and to take a risk. And for this, you need boldness, because when you start, you are not sure regarding the results, and I appreciated your comment that KPIs are not enough to decide some ways of innovation. But if you want to change something, and you mentioned that some of technologies today, or some businessmen have changed, like Musk and some others are changing the rule of the game, and we shall see, I think, for cars, for example, in the future, how it will change drastically. I was telling to myself recently, opening the hood of an electric car, but made of a classical car, and it's empty everywhere. Something has to change, because it's not realistic to have that. So I think, once again, evidence have to be taken using KPIs, benchmarks, and sometimes starting back from the white paper. But at the end, also the collaborative work of your team is also key. And also, for example, a couple of years ago, we started in the solar receivers, and we started from scratch. And inside your team, you have also to detect the people ready to launch this type of challenge. So with probably different capabilities than others, and identify these people that can take the lead is key. So the role of managers in innovation is key in this area.
Thank you. Mark, would you like to comment on anything you've heard so far? I'm giving you a carte blanche.
I think I would like maybe to emphasize to what you said on the testing. We are at AGC. We are an engineer company. I guess there are many engineers here, and many engineers company. So we sometimes we want to push technologies, to push solutions, but we need to stop this. Let's test. First of all, is there a problem? What's the problem? And does our product, our idea, our technology solve the problem? So I think that's extremely important. That's why we have started to hire different competencies, different skills. We have hired designers in our research centers. I believe it's obvious. I know it's obvious, but it's not always done. So this one, I think, is very key. The other one that I would like to emphasize, that's the collaboration. It's key. The world is open. There are many ideas. We need to stop to think that we are the first, and then to think that we are able to do better than the others. So collaboration with startups and other companies. I think such an association as BIR&D is important to connect the people, to connect the dots. So I believe this is key as well. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you the next follow-up question, which is sort of spawned by something Jean said about finding the right people in the teams. What about the role of the R&D teams in terms of pushing sustainability within a business? Is that a push role or a pull role? Should it be who should be driving it, and where does the R&D workforce fit within that?
Well, what we try to do is to have both, of course. We have a push role, but a pull role. In some, I will take a very concrete example. We have defined a KPI, an objective. By 2030, we will have a glass production line that will produce glass without any CO2. So it will be neutral from a CO2 viewpoint. While we are in the heavy industry and we consume energies and natural gas and raw materials. And so there, that's more, a push role from R&D. We are working on the electrification of our processes, on the usage of hydrogen, on some technologies to capture the CO2. There we are clearly on the push role. But once we are connecting on the product side, of course, that's more a pull role. Very concrete example as well. In the building, let's say in the residential building today, there are still a lot of single glass unit. Single glass unit, maybe more than 50% of the building has still single glass unit. The thermal coefficient, we call it the U value, this is 6. It is very bad. The best windows today, it's 0.5. So 50% of the market is still with a single glass unit. And so we have developed a solution to be able to replace this single glass unit, keeping the frame in place. So it's a very thin product that has extremely good insulation properties, and we will be able to replace the glass unit. So that one is more a development coming from a market request.
Can I add something? Yes, to add something to Mark, in John Cockrell, since few years, I am pushing the topic CO2 capture because I was fully convinced. And honestly, it was difficult, even if we did things, and I'm happy that we have done that. But at that time, CO2 price was 5 euro. Today it's 60. And now we came to the pool. And I'm fully convinced that it will move fast now.
Over the last year, we have seen health is the most important thing. And I think I'm very fortunate to be working in an industry where you can change the lives of people directly. My father died from cancer. My personal, my assistant, she knows somebody has Alzheimer's. So there is always each day that you wake up and you have very, as you said, push and pull. It comes from the teams. We want to eradicate HIV. We want to make a difference to Alzheimer's. But at the same time, it comes from the society as well, from your neighbor, from your family. And I think that is extremely, it's different probably in other my colleagues here in industry, but still you can have these bold dreams that you put forward, and then it's about how do you get there. So I just wanted to, and also to add on behavioral. You mentioned there the traffic there. If you see in the last year and a half how we all have changed our lives. Industries, countries, whether they were rich or poor, they went to a lockdown because they found that health was more important than their economy, even was economy was going well or not doing well. But I think we have changed so much in the last year and a half that I believe for sustainability, circular economy, for climate, I think people are much more willing to make the change. It's just we have to make it more visible. We have to communicate it better from government, but also from industry and researchers in an evidence-based way.
Massimo, would you like to weigh in on any of these questions?
Well, I would like to cite an empirical example of, and to attach myself to the comments on cooperation and competition. I think there are, especially in the current situation since start of 2020, one way to approach true sustainable innovation, measurably sustainable innovation, is indeed to combine the strengths and the weaknesses and complement them between a commercial organization and also a supply organization, meaning from one side getting the demand, the request from the market, and from not only our B2B but also B2C environments, and from the supply side to be able to display and show the right capabilities, technical knowledge, scientific knowledge in order to filter out and create this kind of request and create the right level of awareness also in the commercial side in order to talk the same language and go into the right direction of sustainability. What I want to put here an example is a collaboration that AB InBev has been doing this year, the 100+ accelerator together with Colgate, Palmolive, Unilever and Coca-Cola, where dozens of startups have been selected, and the R&D department of this for FMCG have been looking into and evaluating the value, the sustainability value of these startups, and then each one of us was allocating funds, 10K, 50K, 500K, to fund and accelerate these startups. And the main concept here is collaboration outside the company, also competition, because in the end, the benefits will come to the FMCG who pioneered the startup, but also championing the sustainability innovation without the right magnitude, the right gravitas behind sustainability ideas. It will get slowly and slowly into existence, or it's going to get lost. So I think this is a marvelous example of bringing all the pieces and bits and pieces of discussion that we've seen in the past minutes together.
Thank you. Geert, let me ask, where do you see the role of the R&D team in driving sustainability within an organization?
I think I'm going with many of the colleagues here. It's a little bit of both. It's a push and a pull story. It doesn't matter which side of the equation you start. If you don't have something to push, then yeah, what are you going to talk about? But it is something very critical for R&D people to at least keep thinking about it. And so one of the things that we're doing and training our teams on is using quote-unquote sustainability as a filter for any type of project idea, suggestion that they use. Right? So, and they have a crucial role of there, because I don't know about the colleagues, but R&D is the department that has a disproportionate amount of ideas that it's generating. So there it's really, really critical. And at the same time, when you talk about that pull point of view, R&D, and because a lot of R&D people are quite deep, technical and granular. And so they're excellent type of people, to the point that Massi was making also, to evaluate if somebody comes by and says, this thing is more sustainable than something else. To evaluate that point of, does that make sense? And very often one of the things that we see is that people benchmark themselves to something and then they look good. But very often it's R&D people pointing out, like, why are you using that as a benchmark? There are 3 alternatives which are even much more sustainable. And so R&D has this impact both on the push and on the pull side.
Well, that was one of the questions I was going to ask about prioritizing which measures you might take if you have a limited amount of resources to take sustainability measures. So I think possibly you're saying the R&D teams are good for that. I also want to take a question from one of our online viewers asking, is sustainability, including addressing climate challenges, not the key driver, while circularity, or thinking more locally, being only conditions of it? I suppose we would say yes. Ivan, would you like to answer that one?
Circularity often will be more of a local thing. But it depends on the products and depends on the sector. Sometimes you can make circularity work even on a longer distance. And so but you need to, circularity has, for me, the danger that it becomes dogmatic. That the only criterion is that it's 100% circular. But the decarbonization which is happening in many countries is not by using dogmas, it's by, for instance, replacing coal by gas. And if you are a dogmatic person, then you will say, but gas is still fossil. But it's for humankind already a big jump. And you can be more idealistic, but you need to balance the idealism with the realism. So I'm always a bit afraid that the debate becomes too dogmatic, and it's the statement of a very famous philosopher that the perfection is the enemy of the good, and we should aim for the good and not per se for the perfection.
Should we not aim for the perfection, but maybe be okay if we get to the good?
Well, yeah, that can be a technical move, but if you, it depends on your time frame. We want to become perfect one day, but at least make some steps to make it better already.
Werner, let me ask you then, regarding this question of sustainability and the circular economy, is there a danger that we conflate them, that we think that one step is equal to all other steps, or how do we measure different aims? Do you take it on a societal level? Do you take it on a what's easy to comply with from a regulation point of view? Or do you take it on a where can my particular business make the biggest difference?
I follow there what Ivan said. I think it depends on the product or the service. I think that is so crucial in our industry. I think what we try to do more is to follow the whole cycle of the process of the manufacturing of the product, and how we can reuse and resolve and reuse some of the materials that is done in the production process, up to how it is being transported, because that's not a local, it's a global. How do you the logistically, and then in the end where the product is used, and then avoid that, then to recuperate and avoid any impact on the climate. So I think it really depends on that. But again, we live in a global village, so I think it's several of these challenges we have to tackle more on a global or on a European level. And even within the industry, I think there are a lot of pre-competitive topics that are being worked out. How companies work closer with each other on. I saw recently, last week, that the European Commission wanted to one adapter for mobile phones, whatever. This has come from the European Commission, but in fact, industry could have done it themselves, or maybe it has been. I have not been involved. It's not. I'm not in that industry.
It's taken them 10 years to come up with this.
I know. Yeah. So, but I think that is where maybe not being dogmatic, but where government and industry can take more bold steps. But I believe it's just it depends also on leadership, and sometimes the time is not there yet, or it's like any good idea probably has already come somewhere in the world, but it takes sometimes time to make it happen and make it feasible as well, technically, logistically, policy-wise.
Okay. Ariel Barcelo has asked, how do you see policy evolving in Belgium or Europe regarding the circular economy? What kind of regulations do you think will arise for companies to adopt circular business models? I'm also picking this question now because you have just mentioned this new one charger policy. Jean, do you want to mention any policies you think might be useful or that you think might be overly burdensome that you've heard suggested? About? Any sort of regulation or policy to drive sustainability?
I will take an example. We are working presently on a project regarding recycling of aluminium. When you look at the picture, there is a lot of import of aluminium in Europe at present time, of, let's say, a new aluminium for first fusion, coming from abroad, from China, from the Middle East. And in parallel, a lot of aluminium scrap are not at all valorized in Europe, and sometimes are not collected. If they are collected, they go to incineration and are lost. So there is room for improvement. But of course, for example, in that case, if you look at the global chain, and particularly people collecting waste, collecting scrap, according to the price on the world market, it could be more beneficial for them to collect in Belgium and sell the scrap elsewhere in the world, transported by vessels, etc., instead of recycling here in Belgium. So clearly, in the politic for collecting scrap, and there is a huge debate today in Belgium regarding do we have to put a tax on cans or bottles or not. I think the authorities have a key role to play to say and to give priority to what has been collected locally to be transformed locally, unless it is proven that it is beneficial from sustainability point of view and from an economical point of view. But on this point, I'm fully convinced that it has to. And when we look at the forecasted consumption of aluminium in Europe, that it will still grow up, there is room for improvement in this area. And here again, behavior has a role to play, because we, as a consumer, we have also to, let's say, be pushed or pulled to collect this aluminium scrap in order to let this go. So this is an example.
Okay, have you any examples as well that you'd like to give?
Not a concrete example, but maybe linking it back to what Ivan has been talking about in the beginning. I think that, so there's plenty of, if you look at the food space, there's plenty of regulation being put in place for very good reasons. And there's plenty of discussion right now going on about putting in new policies and so on. But the point, the reference I would make is to saying, what of that can we really make evidence-based? And how does that help? For instance, if people are overweight because we're eating too much, is a sugar tax going to help things? There's been plenty of experiments in other countries who have tried this in one way or the other, from what we have learned. And still, if you look at current discussions ongoing, everybody seems to be starting from zero again. And so there is this, I would call it a polarity or paradox that we have to manage, because most of the cases we're talking about here, it's becoming an and story. And so to what extent can using evidence-based policies and bringing that into the equation, not only on the technical part, but also on the social and on the consumer part even, can that help that we make policies and that we put things in place which perverse effect?
Okay. Yes, Mark.
I think what is important as well is to keep the competitivity of the industry. We are inside an emission trading system. That means we pay for any CO2 that we emit. The previous period ended in 2020. So far, the quotas received were enough, but for the new period, it's not the case anymore, and we need to pay, and the price is increasing a lot. So that's for the European, community. But what about the imports? We have products coming from China, from other countries. So that's a key. I'm happy that you promote the industry in Belgium. We will agree, of course. But competitivity is key, and I know that it's the agenda of the European Commission, but it's not so easy. But that's very key. We can pay taxes, we can increase taxes, and I think we should. But we must remain competitive. We must be able to sell our product. Let's avoid to be too dogmatic as well, and to have a very nice, products, very nice processes. But at the end of the day, the product could be too expensive.
You've got your finger on the pulse, Mark, because Kazu Yokota has just asked that, made that very point online, saying, how do you keep competitiveness by promoting circular economy versus companies from outside of the EU who are offering, shall we say, less circular products? Massimo, what would be your take on that? If here in Europe we have an agenda, shall we say?
So I would say that from a conceptual viewpoint, I would like to have your opinion as well, even on this, is government policy needs to have consequence, needs to trigger, stimulate and promote as well evolution in the private sector as well. And what I think is going on from the regulator side is there is going to be a larger call for transparency in our products. And this larger call for transparency will mean that many of our company's products will need to be able to clearly communicate to the final consumers, to the final retailers, and also to the regulator as well, how sustainable it is, how objectively sustainable it is, talking about the carbonization, talking about circularity indexes, and many of these other impact dimensions. And once this surfaces, there is going to be as well incentives for companies or conglomerate of companies, groups of organizations, in order to be more competitive by very practical example by increasing circularity within our supply chains. Example, today the price of recycled PET, the material make our bottle, is higher historically than virgin PET tends to be. And from a physical and mechanical perspective, the quality is not as good as the virgin PET. However, with this call for transparency, it means that also recycling capabilities, mechanical, also chemical recycling capabilities, will be improved by companies which have the interest to improve such in order to gain competitive advantage through cooperation and competition, which has been triggered by this attention of the regulator towards more transparency on what sustainability really means in our products, the products that are going to be on our shelves every day at Colgate, at Deleuze, etc. So I will answer to the question with this.
Werner, I want to bring you in on this question of products from outside the EU. And Mark, you mentioned China. So let's talk about trust as a driving force. And you're talking about transparency in products to appeal to consumers. I mean, we've seen in the very, very clear vaccine area, there's a huge distrust, for example, of the Sino vaccine. And if we say things like children's toys, there's a distrust in that area of products from China. Do you think that same issue is going to play out with regard to sustainability or greener products?
It's, yeah, I don't know. I believe going to make, when I was young, looked at cowboy movies. I always believed that the cowboys or the bad will lose in the end. So I think the cowboys in our industry, in the end, they will not sustain their business. They will not be able to remain in business. And you see it even the comment from online. There were some products coming from China in the past, but now I think the economy in the world that is putting a tremendous amount on sustainability, circular economy, on putting more money in innovation, in green energy, in green products, is in fact China now, because they have seen the tremendous impact on the climate, on their environmental, on biodiversity. So there's a big change there, and made a reference to vaccine or just in healthcare, whether it's vaccines or drugs or medicines or devices. I believe a lot in what you said, Ivan, on evidence-based transparency was mentioned. In the end, the more you digitalize, you make it data-driven, everything will become more visible and transparent, and consumers will know more about our products and services. Sometimes they know it in time more on the impact, the positive and the negative, for the whatever product we bring. So the consumers are going to know in the future much more about what we bring than ourselves, that we do in clinical trials, in our healthcare industry, or in testing in other products. So I think that is going to change dramatically. It's going to, the consumers will know more about what we bring than what we think the features or the characteristics are of the products. And I think it's something you have to work with, and it's not a threat, but it's in fact an opportunity.
And just as a follow-up, do you think there's a role there of an intermediary sustainability auditor between companies and the public perception?
Yeah, no, I mean, it also depends on what product or what service or what we're talking about, whether it's a beverage or a medicine or a vaccine. I think our industry is probably one of the most regulated industry and of course for good reason, because we're all in the end are or will become a patient. So, but I think it's regulation can be a trigger for an incentive, can be a trigger for innovation, and rather than an obstacle.
Ivan, is there anything we've been discussing you want to... I see you writing plenty of notes.
Yeah, but well, these are the difficult parts of the discussion. Certainly, but when we're talking about the global side of things, and that, I believe that indeed transparency is key, so that we know, for instance, how products are produced, how much carbon-based they are, and it's really about a level playing field. If we are in Europe very open, everybody knows how much carbon was used for a can of beer, and a product from China is not as transparent, then that's an issue for a level playing field. I already warned a bit for being too single-minded, only always about taxation. So, but there is this debate on the cross-border adjustment. It's an important debate, but I believe people need to also be realistic that it needs to grow. It can be a very incremental process instead of just being this. In science, we talk a lot about evidence-based, but there is this scientism danger that you just say, the external cost of carbon in steel is that much, so we impose that much of tax. But then if it destroys the whole supply chain, destroys the whole product, then you are not better off. So you need to be pragmatic too. But for transparency can be a way to make things start to evolve. And well, there is this, I like the book a lot, that you can criticize the book, but Matt Ridley has written this book where he says everything has evolved. Nothing was, all processes, whether they are technological processes, but also social processes, it's always about evolution. We think often that things have changed one day on the other, but then you look more closely and it has evolved of course there is this time pressure in a lot of ecological debates, but you need to have some way of maneuver. But you also need a commitment and a driving force. And one of the driving forces in this topic, in sustainability, you need to almost always get at the other side of the coin. It's also about reputation, and having a reputation in the sector, having a reputation in your country, having a reputation on the global space is one of the driving forces. And a lot of philosophers or more philosophical economists are very optimistic on that it will become more and more important to keep your reputation high. And that can be a more stronger force in the long term than overusing taxation instruments.
Well, we've got about a half an hour left. I want to see if there's any questions here in the room, if anyone wants to. I know there's a lot of expertise here as well, so if you have a comment or we want to add to anything our panel is saying, please do raise your hand. Am I seeing any hands raised? No? Oh, yes, one over here. One at the back. We'll go at the back first and then up towards the front. I was going to say, gentlemen, you've solved the problem of sustainability, but...
Yes, hello, good afternoon. A question. I see a lot of big companies starting with specifying it in the supply chain, and by this trying to impose, let's say, circular economy aspects, material passport, digital product passport, LCA, and later on it becomes an essential part of the purchasing policy. Typical grid operators in the Netherlands doing this, because they then have a social responsibility. Do you also see this in your companies?
Who would like to take that? The know your third party element of a supply chain. If nobody raises their hand, I'm going to have to pick someone. Gert.
So yes, we see that as well, because I think it builds on a number of things we were just talking about. If you want to be more transparent, you're going to have to show that. And so there is this element of how can you avoid it on the one hand, and there's a second element that comes later about once you have it transparent and you understand it, what does that mean? And how do you make that organized? For instance, in our case, so if you talk about something like chocolate, it starts from a cocoa bean. There are no cocoa beans in Belgium, and still Belgium and chocolate go very well together. So you have to go back all the way to that supply chain and think about what does that mean? And if you want to make it more circular / more sustainable, you're going to have to do that across that entire chain. Because certainly in our case, there's too many elements that we don't control and for which we have to collaborate and create a transparency on what it means to us, what it means to our consumers, but also what it means to them then. So I think it's a natural evolution that is accelerated by a number of technological things like blockchain and so on that enables that.
Thank you. And you win the prize for being the first person to mention blockchain.
Sorry.
Actually, I think I would have two questions. The first one, I fully agree with you that all the policies should be evidence-based, but on such a difficult and complex topic, sustainability, I would just like to have your opinion on the existing methodologies about LCA, or social or technological LCAs and so on, whether they are really catching the reality of the impact of the products from cradle to cradle, if we are really circular. And that's the first question. The second one, I'm afraid I lost it, but I will come back.
We'll let Massimo answer your first question first, and if it comes back to you, we'll take it.
So I think this is a tremendously important question. It's connected with transparency, connected with installing the right capabilities in the R&D centers and making these results understood also by the commercial side of the business and the consumer as well. And this is actually hitting very close to home, as this is the capability that I am as well developing within the GTEC, so the innovation department of AB InBev. Like me, there are dozens, hundreds of other R&D and technical experts throughout Europe and the world. Now, the question to me here is, when should we be able to use a full life cycle assessment that can take months, perhaps a couple of years, until its finalization, with the significant cost of that, and when we should be using other measures, basically looking at the same things, but on a more aggregate level, a more high-level perspective. And I do think, to answer the first part, a full life cycle assessment makes sense in specific cases. Example, number one, when it's demanded by regulator, I think that's a no-brainer. Number two as well, more and more companies, investors, angel funds are asking for this kind of evidence in order to support startups, piloting enterprises to become more sustainable as well and to launch their own business model. So in these circumstances, when you have to show something and when you want to accelerate something, a full life cycle assessment makes a lot of sense. In day-to-day business decision, many of us, and if you find someone who doesn't have who has this luxury, please connect him or her with me. Many business decisions needs to be taken in few hours, few minutes, and aggregation of data, always looking at the critical impact dimension, decarbonization, MCIs or material circularity index, water stress, but not based on a full life cycle assessment, ad hoc life cycle assessment, but on a aggregation of data still of good level can speed up the process and perhaps achieve the same results, drifting the main mastodontical part of the business towards sustainability. So it's a matter of what kind of tool to be used in what kind of circumstances. And the short answer to your question is, yes, that's super important.
Now you have
yes.
my second question back. So it deals with the acceleration that was mentioned earlier, the need of acceleration in the developments, and also on your comments, Ivan, that in fact we should not be too much in a hurry, but really take the time of the transition and so on. I remember one slide I saw once about the evolution of the carbon emissions since the beginning of humankind, let's say. And you see that it's totally flat until the first industrial revolution, and then it's really skyrocketing, and over the last 200 centuries, it's really now it's where we are now, and this is about carbon emission, but I think that's the same about resource scarcity. Well, definitively we are using more resources than our Earth allows us to use to be sustainable. So I'm not totally in agreement with you when you say that we have to take time, and I'm still looking for really what should be the incentives more than just reputation and this kind, which are fine, but how really to make everybody wake up and really working in this very common goal that we have to come back to something which is much more sustainable. And just to be provocative, I really like meat, but if you make a comparison of the life cycle assessment and the impact of meat over vegetables, I think meat should be prohibited. No?
Well, I know that, that we need evidence-based discussion, and so the meat expertise is maybe not in this room at this point in time, so let's skip that. But no, I take your point, and I'm not the arbiter of the time acceleration, so we need discussion on the speeds, and so, but I was not talking about taking the time, I was talking about the sequencing of instruments. There is this, sometimes we want to overuse the very harshest instruments immediately, whereas there are other instruments which can already start moving us in the right direction, but sometimes this is not necessary to make it a success. If you start with the most dramatic instruments, then sometimes you crush the every acceptancy, and so it's a balancing. I'm also very urgent. I also want urgent actions, but you still need to do it in a smart way.
But Jean, I think, was first, and then we'll come to you. Yep.
No, maybe I want to balance between the two points. In one hand, for sure, we have to accelerate, and for sure for greenhouse gases, it has to be done and faster. But at the opposite, I'm working at present time on two topics. Of course, hydrogen, because at John Cockerill we focus a lot on hydrogen, and we selected for electrolyzers alkaline one. But let's remember at the early 20th century, in Scandinavian country, when they started to produce fertilizer, they were using nitrogen from the air, and they were producing hydrogen by electrolysis from hydroelectricity. And it's only after the Second War that Norway got from Germany, as a compensation for the damage of the war, they got the technology of steam reforming. And they started to produce hydrogen by steam reforming. And now, we at John Cockerill, we have selected alkaline, which is an old technology, but quite efficient, robust, maybe well designed for the needs of big industry. Another example, I'm working, and I will take a student maybe next year on these topics regarding batteries and recycling, because we see the huge development of lithium-ion batteries. But when you look at the topic of circularity and recycling, and you look comparison for some use, for example, in the industry, for storage of big volume of electricity, the old lead acid battery compared to lithium-ion, and look at LCA, as circularity, at percentage of recycling, etc. Maybe it's not, so maybe for this example, we should not be in a hurry and think of what has already been done, and let's say evidence-based. If you look, for example, at circularity today, look at what is done for recycling of battery, and you will be surprised.
Good. I mean, and also, if we're talking about speed, we have seen with the pandemic that business as usual can be overcome to produce things at pace if you feel like you're in a real crisis situation.
That's the necessity thing, right? But I do, on behalf of my employer, but also from a personal point of view, I want to say that the statement of we should stop eating meat is wrong, right? And it's simply because it links to the first part of your question, which is like, what are we talking about? Not all meat is created equal. And so in your statement, are you talking also about fish, or are you talking about chicken, or are you talking about beef cattle running around free on the pampas in Argentina? And those four things are all meat, but they are completely different. Beef in the United States, which is fed on very high-yielding fields, compared to beef being fed or cattle being fed in a Brazilian space where the feed is only growing at half of the yields that you have in certain Western or certain North American countries, it's very difficult to measure and make an absolute statement on that. And so my point to your question would be like, there's something that we as scientists, as techie people certainly can do also, is forcing that dialogue on evidence-based. To the point that you were making, yeah, well, that's not how it works, because because of the speed of decision and because of the real effort it takes to go granular enough to give an answer 3 digits behind the comma, we probably don't have time. But if we do, as scientists, stick together and at least defend the honor of our profession and saying, where's the evidence and what are you talking about? How are you measuring? Are you talking about a relative improvement rather than an absolute improvement? I think that will help. It makes it very difficult for, quote unquote, the general public, if that exists, to understand, right? But the thing that we certainly shouldn't do is take shortcuts and take generalizations that bring a lot of other people into trouble.
Well, I mean, to raise an issue, if we're talking about evidence-based, we have seen in recent years the rise of disinformation, we've seen the rise of climate denial, we've seen anti-vaxxers, we've seen all of this sort of stuff, but do you feel that that's maybe in a reaction to simplistic statements that are easily understood, or is it the fact that granularity is complex and difficult to understand? Is there a problem with the communication here?
That's a very broad one. Yes, yes. So there always is a problem with communication, right? So, but in a lot of cases, part of what we were talking about is saying, because it goes beyond the part on purely the technical scientific, and it also involves the social and the consumer behavior, or the social and the societal license to operate we have in there. You have all the other things which are coming in, which relate to the emotional parts of how we communicate and what we remember. And so in that communication, I think we certainly can get better at technical people as well, by not talking about the technicity and the 3 digits behind the comma first, but making sure that we do understand what that audience is. And maybe Reiner can comment, because in vaccines and people who are accepting vaccines or not, you have exactly the same discussion.
No, I just wanted to add a personal experience there, that I work in the industry now almost 30 years, and last year I was explaining to my neighbor what is messenger RNA, and that it doesn't go into the cell of the DNA of a human. And my mother is getting next week 89 years old, and last year she was asking me, what is PCR? So what is DNA? I am going to have a PCR test. And so it is possible to communicate, whether it's meat or it's carbon dioxide or whether it's biodiversity. I still believe communication is key, and good communication, and there is a lot of noise out there, I know, but I think that there's, as an industry, but also government, but also in academic world and scientists, they have an obligation to keep on communicating the right information.
Okay, sorry, Mark, did you want to add to that? I mean, I'm thinking in terms of R&D teams within organizations, and how do they communicate, not only to the public, it's probably not their primary role.
I don't want to add on this, but I would like to put a focus on let's say, a topic that we didn't discuss yet. That's we spoke about transparencies and having good plans and consistency. That's the impact on those plans on the employees. That's the employees of the company. I think that's key. The cowboys, I don't believe they will have the right people in the future. And this is, I believe, probably more true today than 20 years ago. In our research center, that's I mean, an entry point for people coming in the company. They stay a few years in the research center. They move inside the company. So we have a natural flow of newcomers. But those newcomers, they will not join your company if you are not consistent, if you don't have a good plan, if you don't have a good LCA, or if you don't have good products. I think that's extremely important. And nowadays it's becoming tough to have the good people. So I believe this, on top of all the rest, will have a crucial impact. That's my deep belief.
Well, I see a lot of nodding heads, so I think we'll take it that we're all in consensus on this. Another area we haven't really talked about yet, and I'm conscious of time, is the importance of digitalization and the sort of economy gains, the sustainability and so on gains that could be made there. Does anyone want to weigh in on that? But also maybe take into account the huge energy drain that data centers may well have.
I think the first point regarding digitalization is that the problem we have to solve, that's true for circularity, that's true for energy transition, is complex. Yeah? And even if human brain is great, it's not enough to treat all these issues. And we need more and more simulation, we need more and more mathematical models, we need more and more sensors, and helping to collect a lot of data. And so for this first reason, because it is complex, digitalization is key. It's not new, we use it since decades, but of course technology is changing. So you raise the issue, compatibility and between this development of digitalization and the energy cost. It's a good point. Here again, we have to be fact-based, evidence-based, and make it as simple as possible. Why collecting a lot of data which are stored for nothing? So we have to select the right data, and here again, digital tools can help to select the right data and in order to use it in the best way. So we will have to do with data, with digitalization, the same as we have done in the past with energy, and we are doing with energy or with materials to improve the yield. So we have to do that also for data. But for sure, digitalization is key, it is needed. And one another point which is as important is that if we want to do it here and there, I mean in our countries where we know that salary costs are higher, maybe taxes are higher, we know that any new development we do, any new, for example, for us, John Cockrell, any new equipment we develop, any new manufacturing shop we develop, it has to be as much as possible automatized, because robotized, because salary costs make our business not competitive. So for these two main reasons, digitalization is key, and I think we are convinced. It does not prevent us to improve also the impact and the LCA of digital activity has to be done.
Well, I think as we're drawing to a close, I'm going to come along to each of you and ask you to give me one thing that you think in the future or for your business is absolutely key. Be it something like using a digital twin, is it regulatory sandboxes, is it just a simple switch in culture of a company? It can be absolutely anything. I put no restraints on what suggestions you might make, but as a lever for all of us to really drive sustainability. Ivan, I'm going to start with you.
I found this comment very striking, that communication is possible. I think sometimes we underestimate the capacity of the public, but it's our duty to communicate in a correct way and in a comprehensible way. It's challenging, but it's our duty. And but one of the things we need to make sure of is we need to enable contacts, because we need to communicate in very diversified ways. It can't only be on Twitter. We need also to have other kinds of contacts, because to convince, for instance, with the vaccines and that kind of complexity issues, you need to find the right way to contact people, and then you can communicate effectively, I believe.
Well, including events like today and, of course,
yeah,
talking to people online.
Yeah, we had to pick one. So you asked. I think digitalization. I think is so key, not only in our industry, but I think in general. There is a tremendous opportunity. I agree with Ivan's response earlier that. I think data privacy, GDPR, and other, we have to manage the risks, but we should maximize the opportunities. And it's like 10 years ago, we were, or not that long ago, we were finding all the terrorists in Belgium, Europe, globally. And then, then data privacy for the community, society didn't have, they said we should solve that. But at the same time, we're asking then for other aspects that data privacy should be there. So I think we should find solutions, be creative. I think that will help in our industry, transparency, better outcomes for patients, for citizens, but the same for any type of product. And I think the government can play a key role there, and industry can collaborate there in a pre-competitive way.
As far as I'm concerned, I would say that ambition, that's key. Let's avoid to say that this is impossible. I hear this sometimes. This is possible. We will build a production line that will not produce any CO2. Speak with Sven. Well, I don't know, is Sven about the investment 1.1 billion euro in Ghent ArcelorMittal. This is possible. So I think setting the right ambition and being convinced that this can happen is key.
I think so. I heard so many times at the beginning of GDPR, this will break the internet. But last time I checked, the internet was just fine.
From my side, so many industries and so much complexity, even in one single industry. 4 words: get to the facts. If you don't have the facts, you need to develop capabilities to get them. And if you don't have them, you will be asked, and you're going to be impacted from a people perspective, reputational perspective, and more importantly, from an environmental perspective and overall sustainability perspective, just also beyond the environmental side. So get them and make good use of them.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to add one, which probably doesn't fit completely, but I'm going to call it empathy. Yeah. Simply because if you talk about sustainability, circularity, it has so much to do with, quote unquote, beyond us, beyond our own realm of control. And that very often, certainly as technical people, we're focusing ourselves on our business. And I think the more we can create a mindset in our technical people, which are needing to have to look at everything that you gentlemen have been saying, that empathy of looking over their own fence and bringing in the perspective of other people in the value chain and of society as a whole, that might accelerate the whole thing tremendously.
Thank you.
I would add one point which is regularly discussed inside BIR&D. It is how to attract more young generation in the technical areas in our universities. And probably, I fully agree with what was said, this topic, sustainability, I mean, doing the right thing for the future of our planet, maybe is a key element to attract young talents that we need. And I'm also happy that we recognize each year our PhDs, because when it's about R&D, it's very popular sometimes to criticize the pure scientific research. But when we come back to COVID and the RNN, let's remember that in the early 60s, Professor Monod and Jacob, they made some discovery, which I found today, so 50, 60 years later, great application for our health. But initially, it was done by fundamental research. So we need young talents and we need fundamental research for the future.
Thank you. I think, in fact, we've got some comments in online that say pretty much exactly that. I think we've just about come to the end of our panel discussion. Thank you all so very much. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you all for your attention. It's lovely to be back in a room with people. Thank you for your questions and for following online so very clearly. And I'd love to leave you as well with a quote by William Gibson, which is that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. Marnix, I want to bring you back up because I want your closing thoughts, a few comments. Which of these really wonderful and insightful thoughts, ideas caught your attention?
Okay, so first of all, I would also like to thank all the people here in the panel for this discussion. I hope it was not too long for you to debate, and I'm pretty sure, I think we have plenty of other questions that we did not touch yet. But if I have to summarize, there are a number of takeaways that I at least would like to mention. I think if you look at how we try to answer and resolve societal challenges in our society, we do not have to think only about the technology. And this is maybe hard, because we're all, I think, or most of us in the room are R&D people, but we will have to make sure that we can install also the governance to make it a success, and not forget also the human aspect. And I'm glad to hear and to see, and I think also in the company I'm belonging to, a lot of work is done to bring also more that human aspect into what does technology mean, what are the end customers really needing, and make sure it's getting relevant, because then I think I'm personally believing that we can move the needle faster. So that's one thing. And make also, if we say, okay, we have to make it a success, we have to define how you make it a success, which is meaning you have to define some KPIs that are going associated with it. So that's point number one. Point number two, I hear and I see also within BIR&D, our R&D teams are driving hard in ensuring they can find solutions. They have ambition, I'm pretty sure, and I know, Mark, we have been discussing that one. We should indeed ensure that all those teams do see an ambition and do go for sometimes the bigger, the moonshot, like we call it. That's very, very important. But I'm very confident in the fact that they really go and drive to find it. Yes, there is urgency, but we have to be sure that we are smart and that we, like Ivan rightfully said, don't crush everything in trying to go too fast. That's one. Perfection could be a good goal to try to reach, but don't forget, if you arrive already at the 90-95%, this can be good enough. So that's also a topic that I would like to really give as a takeaway from our conference. Last point. We talked about digital transformation, and that's also very hard, a core part of my daily job in the company, where we also try to provide a lot of solutions. I'm pretty sure that indeed this can offer solutions, but we have to be careful in how much and how far we drive those things, as well as to security, privacy, and so on. But there is, I think, one more important takeaway on that one, and this was also mentioned. The availability of data and the way we communicate with each other will, and you have seen this in the pandemic as well, will definitely lead to the fact that our end customers, even if you're in the B2B, our end customers will communicate and will talk about it, and they will bring as well an important element and factor and information back to how our products and services are behaving and how maybe we should evolve on a number of things. So let's not forget the power, I would say, that is in there. Whether we like it or whether we don't like it, it's there, and we'll have to take it into account. So these are kind of the three bigger takeaways here. So by this, I really would like to thank everybody that joined us online, as well as on-site here. I also would like to thank, and our lady cartoonist has disappeared, I think. I'm pretty sure the cartoons will be outside. We'll make some picture of it for the people that followed us on-site, online today. They will also have a view on how, from a different angle of view, the cartoonist saw our discussion. And I can imagine if I would have to do it as a scientist, technologist, I think it would be really extremely hard. So I'm very curious to see what she could make out of it. So thank you all for your presence, being it online, being it on site, and I would like to close the session here. Fortunately, for the people that here are on site, we have foreseen a networking moment, so please enjoy it. Now we are getting back to be more allowed to do this. Thanks a lot for your attention, and hopefully see you back next year. Thanks.